back to Beyond Well. I'm Sheila Hamilton, and I'm so happy today to talk with Mark Lipman. He's a musician and expressive therapist and a licensed mental health counselor in Massachusetts. And in 2017, Mark completed training to be an HVN facilitator. He's using his values and ethos of the HVN as a compass in his work in psychiatric hospitals and in his own private practice. For those of you who aren't familiar with HVN, it's called Hearing Voices Network. And today we're going to talk with Mark about the work that he's doing. Mark, thanks for joining us, first of all.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
So I'm so fascinated with every time I talk with someone from Hearing Voices, first in hearing about your own personal experience, what drew you to the work.
Yeah. So I am someone who has been on both sides of the experience of being in the mental health field. So I've been a patient and I am a provider. You know, what I was drawn to was just how empowering it was. When I first heard about it, it was something that just kind of it was something that I was seeking out. I was needing, because it was so not ordinary and not really encouraged to have people talk about their experience in a way that wasn't kind of acknowledging that they had an illness.
Right. So I want you to explain just a little bit more. At what age were you, and how profound was the experience of the hospitalization?
Yeah, I was 23, and the hospitalization itself is something I also have had a physical condition in my life that from a very, very young age. So I was in and out of hospitals as a child for that as well. And then when I was 23, I in my way of saying it, I had a spiritual crisis, and that led me to being, hospitalized. So the hospitalization itself was not super remarkable because I had been through it so many times. Still being in a hospital,
Yeah, exactly.
There wasn't a huge difference. It's just that this was a different reason for me being there.
I want you to talk a little bit about why you explore the power of human voice in song and story, and why you think that's so important for the power of the Hearing Voices Network.
That's a good question. Aside from the fact that I do, lead songwriting groups, I've taught songwriting workshops to participants in, who are patients in hospitals. I find that music for me is a way to kind of reach a certain potential of connecting with myself and connecting with the world around me in a way that feels free and feels empowering. So that's something that I find is so important. I think of the voice as, we could think of the voice as just the mechanical voice, the voice you hear and that is captured in sound waves. But we could also think of it as like a metaphysical voice, like someone's ability to express themselves and to feel strong and strength in their ability to express who they are and what they feel.
That's beautiful. Were you in a Hearing Voices support network before you became a group facilitator, and how does the experience differ?
I've been a group facilitator for a long time, long before I was ever heard of the Hearing Voices Network.
Wow.
Yeah, I think in 2007 was when I started working in the field of, therapy, particularly with expressive therapies. And it's something that I never was really sure. I don't know I'm sure there are people who are really into group work at the offset, but it was scary to me to think of, being a group leader using the arts. I just kind of dove into it, and it really, became just a skill set that I developed over the years. And then being able to combine what I know, how to use the arts, how to use this way of nonverbal expression to also include that which, allows for people to explore something that there really isn't a lot of support in the field to explore in a way that, allows someone to feel like they're not being judged.
Yeah.
So to be able to combine those two things, it's just, it's something that I'm still working on, and I just try to apply the values in my groups, just because I see a lot of pain that people experience. I see it in front of me when I'm leading groups, due to the fact that people are just stigmatized for their experience.
Oh, of course. I'm thinking back to your original draw to music and how throughout our history, especially early when we were still in tribes, it was such a profound way to move people through these extreme experiences, whether it was big transitions in their life or whether they'd had some sort of spiritual experience that put them on the extremes of human life. And it was always around chanting and drumming and music that we kind of brought them back into the fold.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So I want to know what your biggest takeaway from your training was.
The biggest takeaway, I think, was to be allowed to not other people.
Mm.
I think there was so much encouragement in that space, and that I found in any of the Hearing Voices Network's trainings that I've been to. There's people who don't necessarily, like, I don't hear voices, as a common experience in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that I relate in that way. So in the training, what came out of that for me, I remember this one moment where I'm someone who dreams a lot,
mm-hmm.
and my dreams throughout my life have really, really affected my waking life and the decisions that I make and the way I live my life and my attitudes. So I'm into my dreams,
mm-hmm.
and I've always been into my dreams. And some of my dreams have saved my life, when I've been in a really having a really difficult time. So for somebody to tell me that my dreams aren't real when there's such a huge part of my everyday life,
mm-hmm.
That was something that I sort of took away from this, is that in a way, it's like, I don't know what the difference is between my dreams that I experience and what I'm hearing these people talk about, who are voice hearers. I'm not sure what the difference really is. That's from my perspective. I can't speak to, someone who is a voice hearer and also has dreams. They might have a different perspective.
Well, I'm also thinking, I'm also thinking the general public might say, well, hearing voices, they think, people who hear voices often think that it's real, whereas we're trained to believe that our dreams are our subconscious and that we shouldn't actually view them as real because there's something that we do while we're in deep rest in this subconscious state, right?
Well, I mean, that might be a way of looking at it, yes. For me, there are certain dreams that seem somewhat pedestrian, but then there are other dreams that seem like I didn't do that, like that happened to me, and it had a very real effect on me physically.
Wow, incredible.
So how do I kind of reconcile that? And for me, the way I do is to just kind of accept that I don't know. I'm not, it's not up to me to know exactly what the truth is. But for me, if anyone were to tell me that my dreams weren't real, I don't think that's for anyone else to say.
Yeah, no kidding. It's never for anyone else to explain another person's experience, right? So I want you to talk about how you use hearing voices, the training that you received in your private therapy practice and in your work at psychiatric hospitals. What does a kind of given day look like for you?
Well, I am, in the hospital setting, any given day is very different than in my private practice, because in the hospital setting, I feel like I'm leading a double life. So it's a little bit more of a dance in terms of that, and in terms of, trying to stick to my values and stick to the values that I believe in of the Hearing Voices Network, and anything else that I hold dear to me. And, it's like living in a world where I feel like I don't really have anyone to talk to. So that's a very different experience than in my private practice, where I'm the one who can sort of set the tone and set the rules and set the space and create it.
Are you saying that because there aren't as many people trained in this type of facilitation, and that you're sort of alone in believing the worth of this type of therapy?
I will say that, yes, I do not feel like there are other people who are trained. I mean, the only other people that I've met who understand the Hearing Voices Network, I've met a couple of people on the other side who are consumers, and they understand it. So that's the only, it's kind of ironic, I don't, as a staff member, I don't really feel fully able to confide in other staff members the kind of understanding that I have.
That's fascinating to
me. I
me.
find often it's this dance to kind of make it not as revolutionary as it actually is.
And it's really interesting to me just because I know that most psychiatrists and psychologists and mental health workers have great curiosity. And so one would think that they would at the very least be very curious about this method that tends to help patients. The people who are going there for their care talk in such glowing terms about the experience of having someone know this type of therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
So if one of those professionals did decide to follow suit to try to find out more information, what kind of advice or cautions would you give them?
First of all, it can be very shocking to have things that we have believed to be true turn out to be not, or not the only reality.
Yeah.
So, we live in this world, or the hospital world particularly, is one where there's a certain consensus reality, and the Hearing Voices Network is an entirely separate one in some ways. And I don't think, I think for advice that I would give, I feel like I've really been deeply affected by the trainings that I've received. So I would maybe just tell people to be prepared for that. I remember one training where the facilitator said one thing to me about how he ended up, kind of in the emotional state that he was in and the belief state that he was in, and, something that horrible that happened to him. And I just went out to my car for lunch and just cried the whole time.
Wow.
I was like, I can't understand how something could take that away from somebody.
Wow.
It must have been extremely painful. Yet here he is, teaching us how to get through this.
Wow. So health professionals are so often required to do these kind of continuing education classes and maintain their license to practice by continuing to find out new therapies and new ways of doing things. How did this kind of training compare to other courses that you've been through? And what do you say would be the value of this particular type of training?
I will say that this particular training was one of the most comprehensive trainings. The one for the facilitator training, to be a Hearing Voices Network facilitator, it's hard to compare it actually, because it's almost like taking down this kind of structure of belief of, illness, the illness model, and kind of taking it down and then being able to experience what it's like without it. It's a very different kind of training. I find that it's really effective for that purpose. It's extremely effective for that purpose, to experience what it's like to, have something that feels safe, that feels effective, that feels supportive, and to do all of that and more without the need to believe in this kind of illness model.
If you would talk just a little bit about some of the direct feedback that you've had from clients who've gone through these extreme states and then been turned on to Hearing Voices Network, what have been some of the things that people have said or done that make you believe that this approach is really worthwhile?
Well, one of the things, is that first of all, they're a safe space for people to share their experiences. And I think that in order for me to share a story, I can share something, but I obviously can't share specifics.
Sure.
What I have heard is that, say for somebody who's experiencing an extremely scary voice, I have heard people tell stories of how they have been able to confront that voice in many different ways. One story I remember is somebody talking about like how they accessed their partner because they couldn't face the voice on their own. So they asked their partner for support, and their partner was the one who addressed this scary voice and basically, had the confidence and had the, strength to tell it that it needed to respect the person and it needed to, kind of respect the rules of the house if it was going to be there.
Wow.
That hearing stories like that, how, voices have been successfully kind of coped with or shifted, the energy is shifted to one that is more manageable or, to one that is actually, taken a voice that used to be a scary voice or, one that would always be kind of this threatening, fearful thing, and to eventually over time, come to know how to understand what the voice is trying to say, because it's sort of like a way of understanding the voices as their own entity, as their own one half of the relationship, you and the voice.
Yeah. Mark, it's been so cool to talk with you. Do you have anything else you want to add before we hang up?
I just really want to encourage people to check it out, check out the Hearing Voices Network, and don't be afraid of what it has to offer, and don't be afraid of, it's something that will make things worse for someone, because it's really this beautiful way of connecting that's not really out there for people so much. So it's this one way that really is valuable for people to understand that they don't necessarily have to believe that they're worth stigmatizing.
It's been wonderful to talk with you, Mark. Thanks again. Mark Lippman, our guest today on Beyond Well. Mark, a musician, an expressive therapist, and a licensed mental health counselor in Massachusetts. He is talking today about the Hearing Voices Network. This show is brought to us by the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care, and we would love you to support the foundation. For more information, just click on the link below.